Here we go. Right, so we need to hark back initially back to Lamavav Amud Aleph. That is 36a. And we're going to start again from Itma Shema Shema Sada Shema. Just to have a recap of what we're looking at, we're going to delve into what exactly the reasoning is behind the problem of Shema Shema Sada Shema, a god who gives something to another god without permission from the owner. And we're going to look at the argument between Abaye and Rava about this, and we're going to look at the Tosfos on that. So there's plenty to go at. And if we can get ahead to start the new Gemara after this, then bully for us. But I don't know if it will, because it's delicate stuff. And it's going to get more delicate with the next Gemara, because, yeah, it's hard. It's hard. It's hard. All right. Okay, so we are about a quarter of the way down the page. Sorry, I tell you that, about halfway down the page. No, more than that. About sinking fast, this one. It'll call it about halfway down the page. Yeah, it says you got itma at the beginning of the line, and you got an asterisk by that. Okay, it's about halfway down the page. Good. So, itma, it was stated. Shema Shema Sada Shema. If you've got somebody looking after something, looking after somebody's cow, let's say as a favor, we'll keep it simple, and because you got something to do or whatever, it can't be bothered anymore, you give it to your friend to look after without the owner's permission, without the owner's knowledge. You just do it. All right? What's the din? So this point is argued in halacha between Rav and Rabbi Yochanan. We think, although Rav Chisda says, learning from the case with the spades, that actually is not argument at all, that Rav actually agreed to Rabbi Yochanan, but we're not actually going to go that far for now. We're just going to look at Rav and Yochanan and say, just to get that clear in our minds, and let's see how we do. So it was stated, Shema Shema Shema, if you've got one guard who hands the thing he's looking after over to another guard. Rav Omar Pata, Rabbi Yochanan Mechael. The question is, if something happens that is unpredictable, out of the blue, the thing dies of natural causes or is struck by lightning or whatever it is, what's the deal?
So we are saying that the guy who is voluntarily looking after the cow has now passed it on to the second person without the permission of the owner.
Correct. Yes.
That's our starting point.
Yes. We absolutely have. I'm going to go back over it just because I want to get a clear run. Because you'll see it's good to get everything straight in your head. All right?
Yeah, I remember Shlomo wasn't there.
Okay. Right.
I've still got the cow.
So, Abaye now explains both Rav and Rav Yochanan. Abaye says, "L'tamei de Rav, according to Rav, this does not only apply in a case where the guard to whom the first guard passes it over is a paid guard. So the first one was a volunteer. Let's say he hands it over to somebody else to look after on his behalf, and he pays the second guard to look after it on his behalf until it's time to give it to the owner. So there, certainly we can understand that if the animal should die of natural causes or in some terrible catastrophe in the custody of the second guard, we understand that there for sure the first guard is exempt because he's taken a hit financially to give it over to this second guy. So you're right. We're talking about he did not have permission. Rav says it doesn't matter. Not important.
Yeah, but what's it? Like Michael said, like Michael gives me, he knows me, he trusts me.
Yeah.
And I've given it to somebody else, and Michael's not happy with that.
We're coming to that. That's exactly what we're doing today. So hold that thought. Thank you. We're going to investigate this in great depth. You'll see. Trust me. Okay. That's exactly the Abaye Rava thing and the Tosfos thing. All right. So we're going to come to that. All right. So not only that, says Abaye, let's say, for example, that the first guard was a paid guard, and he handed it over to a volunteer as a friend, to do for him as a favor. And I feel the great garnish even if the paid first guard handed over to a voluntary second guard, where now the level of security is diminished, is reduced, because the second guard only has to guard against his own negligence, whereas the first guard has to watch out for thieves. Even in such a case, Pato, says Rav, if anything untoward should happen to this animal, that could not be predicted, the first guard is exempt. My time, and what is the reason? The Masala Ventas, because the first guard can say, look, I handed it over to somebody with capacity. I didn't give it to just, somebody who didn't have the mental faculties to look after it. It was a normal person. So what do you want? It was just as good as me. So by and large, that's it. And if they got struck by lightning, it makes a difference if it was a paid guard or a voluntary guard. Then they got struck by lightning. What can I do?
A paid guard feels that, you're being paid, it's got more responsibility.
Yes.
Otherwise you won't get paid.
Yes. Even so, the first guard can argue with him that he got struck by lightning. So I didn't do anything grossly negligent. I handed over to somebody who knew what he was doing.
That sounds shocking.
That came in a flash of inspiration.
Oh.
Okay, so that is Rav's view, according to the first part of the Gemara. Now, Rav Yochanan, you recall, says that if the guard hands it over to somebody else without permission, he is liable even for sin, even for something that happens in an unpredictable and cataclysmic way. Not only if you have a paid guard who hands it over to a voluntary guard, where you diminish the security around an animal, not only in that case are you liable, Ella, but further, even if you got a voluntary guard who hands it over without permission to a paid guard, where you've actually boosted the protection around this animal, nonetheless, by virtue of the fact that you've done something without the owner's consent and permission, that ipso facto means that you're liable even if it's an onus, it's something that happens out of the blue.
Why would a show give it somebody and give it over to pay somebody?
Well, I can make you a scenario if you want. I don't need to know that, to be honest, but okay, it's fine. So, for example, the Shem Mechinon, let's say the first guard is voluntary, and the second guy is paid, and the first guard is thinking of spending a quiet 2 weeks at home with the cow, and then the most amazing business opportunity comes up. But it's across the country, so he's going to have to travel a long way to get it. It's a once in a lifetime. He's going to make an absolute fortune. You've got this cow to look after. So I'll hand the cow on. I'll pay him 50 quid. I'm going to make $1 million. So I'll pay him 50 quid. It's worth it. So there's a scenario for you if you're interested. Or he's in India. He decides he wants to go on holiday. And what about the cow? I'll try and find some look after the cow, and he can't. So I'll slip him 50 quid. I'll buy him.
Well, it can be a genuine case where he has to give it over. Because somebody dies.
Yeah. Never got to go to Shiva, whatever. Yeah. Could be. We don't know. It doesn't matter. At the end of the day, whatever it is, you meant to ask permission. Unless
basically will take that principle to pay.
They might.
Somebody is doing something somebody's got to say Shiva.
Yeah.
That's got to be taken.
So then they might regard it as onus, or they could say maybe he should appoint somebody else if he can.
Well,
Let's say. So if it's an onus gomor, like let's say he falls ill, he's never seen a coma. What can he do? He's laid up in hospital. There's nothing he can do. So then I think I'd have some sympathy. I think Beit has some sympathy. He didn't do anything wrong. Never. So then maybe he should appoint somebody else to do it on his behalf.
I'm saying if he did do that, then he can.
I see.
He's done nothing wrong. He's doing these sorts of things.
Yeah. Okay. I hear. That could be that. But we're not talking about that case. We're talking about where he's been bad, or he just chose to do this in an irresponsible way. I don't know how far sitting Shiva will be an excuse.
make up for me.
Takes a question, so why didn't you take the carry?
This is an idiot. He's an idiot.
So why didn't you put it load of it? It's not
He
really-
didn't realise. It's down a dog and duck. They're drunk as laws. What do they know? There they are.
What about, Rabbi, what about, sorry, if we flipped, right, maybe I missed the moment we flipped, because last week we were talking about it was an amount of money. They were holding an amount of money, and they were going to stay up all night and make sure the money didn't get stolen.
Yeah,
But we're now
yeah.
talking about a cow. Did I miss the flip?
No, we just started off with cows this week. I'm a fickle guy. I just felt I talked about
No,
cows.
no, no, only because they sort of feel different in a sense. Okay.
Yeah, truly, it could be anything. That's the truth.
Okay.
It could be anything. I just
Because I've, you can't change it halfway through. Because I've given this chap the money in Israel to look after, because I've had to go away, and there he is. I thought he was responsible, and suddenly he's on the road to Jerusalem with fire falling all around him, and I'm
Okay.
thinking, well, where's my money? He's on his way to Jerusalem and going back to yeshiva, and suddenly it's all going wrong because I've given Akiva the money to look after.
Oh no! How much?
You see?
I think him a
I trust he's
calculator.
okay, by the way.
He talked to me about the yeshiva barn where he's spending a lot of time. I wonder what it was.
Exactly.
He
There we
like to
are.
see me, but Baruch Hashem, he's all right. Thank you,
Thank God.
thank you for that. Okay, so yeah, I'm sorry.
Why are you beginning things that dealing with idiots?
Gemara's full of idiots, not the rabbis, but the people in the cases. He's an idiot. The guy's irresponsible. A simple case, he's irresponsible. He can't be bothered anymore.
So why
Too
do
much.
you make somebody happy who's an idiot?
When I say idiot, I don't mean he lacks capacity. I mean he's behaving irresponsibly. He's a bad man. He's shiftless.
Well, why would everybody give him to God?
Like I say, when you've had a few, everything looks great. But come on.
I spent my professional career dealing with these sorts of idiots, and they do the most stupid shit without thinking, what planning, and afterwards it all comes home to roost, just like movie. So don't think.
Talking about a cow, not a rooster.
He's a feckless wastrel. What are we to do? What are we to do? Yeah. So Shiva, I get. I have sympathy for sitting Shiva, but he's an idiot. The guy's an idiot, and this is what he did. What are we to say? And now
He's an idiot. He's sitting shiva when no one's passed away. That's how much of an idiot he is.
that could well be.
Yeah, but it's better than the shivering cow.
Yeah, that was weird. Alavai. Okay, so this is what he did. So we've got this argument between Rava and Rav Yochanan, and Abaye has explained both those cases. And Abaye says, even if it was a voluntary guard who handed it over without permission to a paid guard, he's liable. Why? Because the owner says to him, I do not want my article to be with somebody else. Let's say it's the cow. I don't want my cow to be looked at by anybody but you. That's just what I want. And Tosfos explains this. I'm going to put you into the middle of a Tosfos on the left, because how he gets there is something which is to do with a later one, which I don't go into now. If you look at Tosfos on the left, we've got Tosfos Tibah HaMaschil Ein Ritzoni. It starts near the top of the page on the left, and we have to go about halfway down the Tosfos. You'll see there's an abbreviation at the end of the line. It goes Yud 2 strokes Lamed.
Yes.
That's where we're up to. Yesh Lamed. That is to say, the Hatam, the reason is the Chosh, this explaining Abaye's explanation of Rav Yochanan. What do you mean? I don't want my article to be in anybody else's possession. So what if you don't want it? As the owner, maybe you have no choice. Why aren't you giving it over to him? Maybe just consign it to his good graces, to him to do what he likes. And the Gemara and Abaye says in Rav Yochanan, that's not true. The owner can stipulate whatever he likes. He can say, if it rains next Tuesday, you have to pay me £1 million. If they agree, well, there it is.
Yeah, but it's not a big commotion.
This is by word of mouth, I'm afraid.
Without aiding.
Let's assume either they agree or they're wrong witnesses, as you wish. There's no dispute about the facts. Could be written. It could be with Adim. It could be just it's worth a lot more. But choose what you will, but it's not disputing what was said. Okay. And so again, Tosa says that time the reason the choshev is considered ki'ilu as if Pirish like he explained to him she'im yishana midatai, if the guard should deviate from what the owner stipulated, could go in, for example, she'im sereno la'acher, they hands the cow over to somebody else. She'yir ki'ilu pashaba, we will regard that as if he was negligent. That is the deal. I'm so particular that my cow should only be looked upon by you, that if you hand it over to anybody else in the world, even the head of the Royal Veterinary Association, I don't care. I will regard that as a pashia, as negligence. The whole oisin sheyerula and any accidents that befall it, shenucha listless, that we can attribute it. Shim loy masal laches loho ne'araim chayaba. So anything which happened to this cow that could be traced back to this unauthorized handover, that means that the first guard will be liable for that. Could go in, for example, in Mesa Babesh Shemesheni, if it dies in the house of the second guard. The Yesh Lislos, we can argue the Havla da Oisoi Bayis Katala, that the bad air in the second guard's house killed the cow. You know, if you'd left it in my barn where it's nice, or in your barn where it's nice and airy and properly ventilated and whitewashed and cleaned out every day and mucked out in a proper fashion, then fine. But you take it to his house where you fungus going on the walls. It's disgusting the way he lives his barn, and it does not appropriate. So you could say that's why he died, because it's in your filthy barn, breathing in the mold and the stench and the muck. And that's why he died. Well, she died, the cow. So that's how Abaye sees it. When he says, I don't want my thing to be there else, he's saying, you're now on notice that I will regard what you do as negligent if you deviate from my instruction to give it to anybody else. And as long as I can reasonably attribute, or even a bit unreasonably attribute what befalls my cow to your negligence, you are liable. That's what the owner said to the first guy. Yeah, but yes. Even if the guy thinks it's a complete volunteer. Yes, you're right. Thank you. That's the word I look for. Ishmael. You should not have done it. You don't want to take it on. Don't you can't stand here, get out of the kitchen. Don't take on responsibility. You don't want to commit to. Yes, he had one job to do. Look after the cow. If he didn't want to take it on, he should have said no thanks. If he said yes, I will, that's on him. Yeah. Okay. So that's what Tosa says. According to Abaye, once he handed
I thought Tosa said, Rabbi, I thought Tosa said that the onus is on the original person.
The guard, the first guard.
Yeah.
That's right. The onus on the first guard to look after it himself. If he hands it over to somebody else without permission, then we will regard that as negligence, even though it isn't really, because it's a reasonable thing to do. But the owner says, I stipulate now, as terms of this handover, in terms of your guardianship of my cow, that any handover to anybody else will be regarded as negligence, and anything happening that can be attributed to that handover will be on you. You are liable.
Rabbi?
Yes.
I'm not sure if this has been discussed already, but if something happens to the original guard one, let's say they get appendicitis, they're rushed to hospital, or they're put in a situation where their life is in danger, or something of that nature, surely then it's in a better place with guard 2, because guard 1 is no longer in a position to be able to look after the cow.
You're right, and we're not talking about such a case. That would be a case of onus. That would be a case where, and as we're saying, the Shiva is sort of on the cusp. I'm not sure. But certainly, if it was like, somebody came and waved a gun at him and said, hand it over now, he don't want to guard the cow with his life. It's not that important. It's not like football. So this is different. And you're right. So, but we're talking about a case who, as Michael so eloquently put it, was a shmerel. He mentally had to the cow. He just couldn't be bothered. It was too much trouble. And he's a lazy guy. He wanted to go carousing in the town. So he thought, you know what, I'll give it to my friend.
Okay.
But that does make sense because using that analogy, he
Yeah.
could then lend it. He could say, "Well, I'm going to go and do whatever it is, and I'm not feeling well," and he ends up giving it to a shmerel to look after. So it
That's
has
also
to
true.
be the
No,
original person, the
even
original
if you
guard
didn't,
has to be responsible.
right? But even if you didn't, even if you hand over to a reasonable guy, and then he got struck by lightning, whatever, it's still on him.
I agree. No, I'm agreeing with it.
Right,
I don't think there's any way around it.
Well, you'll see. Because Rava disagrees with Abaye. Rava says,
Colin, it
Yeah,
depends.
it depends. It's true. True. True.
Smells because they're drinking the dog and duck and
Yeah,
the dog and goes
yeah.
out.
That's right. All they have to do is neck a beer. They're appalling.
Exactly.
Yeah. All right. So
Rabbi, can I just ask one question? I hope you
yes.
don't mind.
No.
The cow is a metaphor. The cow could be anything.
Yes.
So does the value of, I mean, a cow is a cow and has value, agreed. Does this apply to everything from, I don't know, a ring that's not worth so much to a yacht? Are
Yes.
there,
Yes. A can of Coke, a banana, a grape, anything.
There's a big
does
difference
the
between a
answer
can of Coke and a
vary?
yacht.
Does the answer vary dependent on the
Value.
actual monetary value of the item?
As long as it's worth a pruta, speak to Colin about pruta. He's the expert in these things. As long as it's worth a
Okay.
pruta, which is about the price of 20 grams of bread. That's the minimum amount of pruta that I've seen. So that's about, I worked it out, it's about 10p. So maybe grapes too little, a sprig of grapes, a tangerine, definitely. Whatever you give over, that's the deal. You got to look after it. If you give me a tangerine to look after, I mean, after a couple of days, fine. If it's for a couple of weeks, there's not very much left of it.
It would be better. It would be divine.
Keep the money. That's right. We talked about that. Yeah, you should care. Done that in if you find, let's say, a bottle of milk or a chicken, you can sell it on and do something with it. Yeah. Because if you find a bottle of milk, just keep it on your kitchen table for the next 6 years. It can be running off the road by itself after that time. All right. So that is Abaye in Rav and Rav Yochanan. According to Rabbi says, Rav says as long as you give some of the capacity, it's fine because you did something reasonable. Abaye in Rav Yochanan says no. It's as if the owner stipulated. Says Tosas, if you give it to anybody else, then I regard that as negligent. I stipulate that is the case. Whether I'm being reasonable or not, that is irrelevant. Because if you and I both agree that this is a term of the deal, then that's it. So thus Tosas, and now we go over the page. Then we've got the thing about the Nahardoi. About did Rav say that? We've got Rav Chisda. Then we've got the case of the person who hands it over, and then the guy who receives it hands it over to his children or his wife. We said that's a different case. So we've done all that. Now we're back to 36b. So now we can start after half an hour. There's a second. So deep. Okay. Now then, 1, 2, 3, 4, 5, 6 lines down on the next page on my Rava. Got a little asterisk there in the middle of the line. Hilchasad, the rule is, so Rava, because it's a new voice, we had Abaye explaining Rabbi Yochanan. Now we've got Rava, who is going to fit in with Rabbi Yochanan's opinion, but he's going to argue with Abaye about what Rabbi Yochanan meant. We recall that Abaye says, according to Tosas, this is just a stipulation. If you hand it over to anybody else, I regard that as negligence. That is the owner's point. Rava says no. Rav Yochanan's objection to Shomer Shemasa the Shomer, one God given to another God, is different altogether. So let's look at Rava. Rava says if a God hands over to another God without permission, he is liable, even for own sin, even for things that are out of that nobody can protect against. Not only in a case where a paid God handed it over to a voluntary God, where he's reduced the guardianship, the security. Even a voluntary God given to a paid God is liable. My time, what's the reason? This is it. This is where Abaye and Rava diverge. Abaye said, because he says, I don't allow. And if you do that, I regard it as negligent. Rava disagrees with that. Amar Rava. So sorry. Maita, what's the reason? To Amalei, he says to him, at behemlessly bishvor, I trust you with an oath. Hech? Lay behemlessly bishvor. I don't trust him. Even on oath, he's such a ne'er-do-well. Oh my goodness. What, you're going to give my account to Mr. Cray? Forget that. Out of the question. No, I'm not doing it. What a gangster he is. What a thug. What a mobster. No way, I'm doing nothing at all to get involved with him. And the first one would say, well, yeah, but he'll make a shavua in court. He'll show me it was right. No, I don't trust his Bible oath. No, I'm not having it. So again, Abaye says that the problem with handing a God handing it to somebody else is that the first God says, the owner says, I do not allow. And if you hand it over to somebody else, I regard that as negligence. So even if it dies unexpectedly, we'll trace some attribution of the event back to the unauthorized handover. That's what Abaye says. Rava says, no. The point is that the owner trusts the first God, he does not trust the second God. That's what he says. I don't trust him. So you may be best mates with Mr. Cray. I am not. I do not want my cow being over to him. What did he do? Handed it over. And Mr. Cray is taking care of it, and it dies. It just died in the night. And now the owner can say, well, and I don't believe it. This is
What if it's an unavoidable loss? You can't avoid, it's like something's happened that's unavoidable. I was trying to think of something that I've given it to somebody, and it's died from the hard work that I put it through. I absolutely knocked his kishkis out yesterday. I've now given it to you. Unavoidably, the cow's died. And I know I'm sitting there watching this poor cow. I'm giving it some hay and it's died. So unavoidable to me. I don't know what's happened. What happens in that instance?
so even Abaye, I mean, Tosh is going to deal with this in more detail, to be honest. But just to do the case very briefly, I think even Abaye would say that's okay because it is so clearly not the result of the handover from the first and second guard. It's when the owner handed it over to the guard that the cow was basically dying.
Yeah.
So then the if it dies in the second guard's barn, the first guard can say, well, it was dying anyway. Never you gave it to your life support,
But I put that under the heading of like unavoidable to me, the
You're
second
right.
guard.
You're right. So even Tosus would agree in Abaye that there has to be some sort of connection between the handover and the death of the cow. But if it was clearly dying because of what the original owner did, then you're right. Then that he won't be liable. Because you can say you worked it to death basically, and you just gave me this half-dead cow, and it died in my possession or the other guy's possession. Not my fault. But that's not our case here. It's where it's not so clear where if you were to say if it was to die on just in the first god's possession, then the first god would be innocent because he would say, well, I locked it up in my field as I was meant to do, and then it died. I'm not liable for that. But if you hand it over to somebody else, then we're into this sort of more severe situation where because he went against, according to Abaye, because he went against the first owner's wishes, the owner will say, I now will find any excuse to connect the death of the cow to your handover to the first god, and you will agree to be liable to that. That's the deal. But Rava says, no, that's not the problem with one god handing over to another. The problem is rather that the owner says, I don't trust him. And remember, what happens is that the reason why the first god is not liable if the cow actually just died unexpectedly in his barn is because the first god can take an oath in basting and say, on my Bible oath, it just died. And then the owner has to walk away with nothing. But if he hands it over to somebody else, says Rava, the owner can say, I'm not prepared to walk away on hearing the second god's oath because I don't trust him, even with an oath. That's why, says Rava, the first God has to pay. Because he can say to the first God, you handed over to somebody whose oath I cannot trust. Therefore, the mechanism of an oath making me walk away is not here, because I won't entertain his oath. And he has a right to say that as a stipulation in the deal. Therefore, the first God has to pay. Yes, ma'am.
When you're looking at the note, surely you went to the best.
Ah, yes, right. Brilliant. Brilliant. So I think this is the point here. That it, and I don't know as he says this, but it's like this, where according to Rava, where it's about the believability there. Of course, you're right. Normally, the basic one, if he's made an oath, that's it. But he's saying no. Because you hand him a second person, I am stipulating in our terms of contract that I will not accept his oath as an exemption from payment. Therefore, I will regard you as liable.
But then you go back to Rose and Crown when the original deal.
Yes.
What proof have you got?
It is well.
Because it was written down.
So they're probably too drunk to remember the pair of them, but we will assume that that's the case. Rava is saying that is implicit in the arrangement.
Principle, you think of something like this.
Yeah.
That's not it.
Yeah, yeah.
If you allow people to check it, well, I believe this one.
Right. Only because the first God misbehaved. And so it's implicit that, I trust you by virtue of the fact, as Reverend Lemon said more than once, and with good reason, if I hand it over to you, is because I trust you. But he can say, well, if it turns out it's left down, you're right, he's an idiot and a scoundrel. You're right, but he didn't know that at the time when he handed it over, because the beer was particularly strong that night. You're right, you're right. But
Rabbi,
so when he does hand it over, he's saying, now the owner can say, I only give it to you because I trust you. I do not trust him. Therefore, I will regard it as embedded in the contract that, in retrospect, perhaps, but that's okay. I regard it as implicit in the contract. I assume, famous words, that you would understand. I'm going to give it to you, and I do not trust him. So I don't regard you as exempted because of his oath. You must still pay me. And it is implicit that the first God accepts that by taking the kind of first. There you go. You can't even.
so yeah, Rabbi, what if you flip that completely?
Right?
And you've lent it to me,
Yeah.
and then I say, right, I've done it. You're now taking Rover back, Rover the cow, and Rover the cow's coming back, and there's not a dog in this case. So Rover the cow's coming back, and it's lovely to see you, Rover. Pat on the head. You put it in the barn. The next morning you wake up and Rover's dead. Who's responsible there? Because I may have worked it to death, as you've lent it to me. I haven't looked after it. I don't know. It's come back to you.
Yeah.
And 2 days later, it's dropped dead.
Okay, so there, it's a slightly different case because you're talking about lending rather than just looking after.
Oh, looking after. Okay, I'm looking after it, and then I'll give it to you back. And you say, well, you couldn't have looked after it very well. Is I guess what I'm getting at. You didn't do your job.
Okay, this comes later.
Looking after it.
We're going to come to this later in the Gemara, so I don't talk about it.
So
now.
because I'm only saying that he must have a responsibility, and that responsibility means, if you can't, you've got to look after it properly, and you can't pass it on. They come under the same sort of heading in my mind.
Possibly.
Okay.
Yeah,
No, I knew that would be the answer. I didn't think it was going to be right, but I just thought I'd throw it in the mix.
Yeah, it's very good. The Gemara's going to deal with this about where he hands it back, then he dies. Yeah, we're going to deal with that, but not now. Okay, fine. So, wow. Okay, so Tyson says, here's a rumdu. What practical difference is there between Abaye and Rava? So Abaye says that he stipulates if you hand it over, then I regard that as negligence, and anything coming from negligence you're liable for. Rava says, I only trust you with your shivur to exempt yourself if something untoward happens, but not anybody else. So I will not accept that oath, and I'm my right to do it because I'm stipulating in the contract. And if we agree to that, then that's it. Basically, cannot do anything. There you go. That's your point. Okay. And if they both agree, well, that's it. That's it. So what's the practical difference between Rava and Abaye? Says Tosis. So this is the little Tosis on the right here, where it says "at heavenly bishmor," the big "at" there on the right. Opposite about 3 lines down the Gemara. At heavenly bishmor, ulekach. Therefore, says Tosis in Rava, who says that it's about the owner not trusting the second God oath. Heicha, where shehashem harishon yochel yishova al ones. If for whatever reason the first God could make an oath about what happened, or as Rev. was saying before, there are witnesses, potter, he'd be exempt. Okay, so let's stop there for a minute. So, for example, let's in this case here. The first guard handed over to the second guard without permission. Second guard is walking home with this donkey. Oh, a cow, right, with the cow, with the cow. And as he's again, as he's walking home with this cow, a bolt of lightning comes out of the sky, strikes the cow dead, and that's it. It's blasted to cinders. Just so happens that the first guard was still lounging in his porch, beer in hand, watching the second guard take it down the road. So now it's not only down to the second guard to make an oath, the first guard can also, he said, well, it wasn't in my charge, but I saw it. I saw what happened. It got struck by lightning, it dropped dead. So according to Rava, the owner has to put up a shutter. Because he says, I don't trust the second guy, but I trust the first guy. Now it's the first guy making the oath. He says, I saw it. So fine, he'll have to walk away. According to Abaye, no, Abaye says, once you hand it over without permission, then I regard that as negligence, and anything that I can attribute to the handover, I will attribute to your negligence. So Abaye would say, in that case, the reason why the cow died that bolt of lightning is because you handed over to the second guard and took it to the street corner where the lightning struck. If you'd not handed over, stayed in your barn, that would never have happened.
Because he was a Shmerel.
Sorry?
Because he was a Shmerel. He didn't know the lightning was going to.
Yes. He should have known the lightning was going to come there. No.
Exactly.
But according to Abaye, anything that happens as ultimate handover is regarded as being the fault of the first guy. But according to Rava,
Gotta be. It has to be.
Sorry?
I just think it has to be. I don't see how you can flip it. I know you're going to, but I don't see how.
Rava says no. Rava says the only issue that the owner has is that he can say, I don't trust anybody else's oath but yours. So if the first guy is prepared to make an oath because he saw it, he was close by when it happened. Or, wolves came or bandits came, whatever it was, a cyclone. So then in all these cases, the first guy can still make an oath. So according to Rava, then that would be enough to stop the complaint to the owner. But according to Abaye, he'd say no, as long as I can attribute what happened to your handover, we both agree that we regard that handover as negligence, and anything that can be attributed back to that negligence, even somewhat remotely, is going to be your fault. So Toy says that is the difference between Abaye and Rava.
If you want to give it over, somebody else's charge.
Yeah.
Do we not understand then you were trying to get in touch with the owner and say, look, something has come up.
Yeah.
About that terrible news on the
Yeah.
And then obviously it was okay. He showed him justice.
Yeah.
So then he would have a chance to do it.
Absolutely, but he didn't. He just wrote. Yeah. You're spot on. Okay, so Totus goes on. Even if he handed over to somebody without capacity, and it died in their possession, in their charge. Even the since it would have died anyway in the first person's home, the Malach makes the difference. The angel of death can strike anyway. Yeah, but then
taken it on. If he hasn't got the capacity to look after it, we're talking about idiots. He's a big idiot to take it on.
Yeah. But then because it would have happened anyway, there's no reason why it should have died in one place or the other. Let's assume it's exactly the same condition. But let's say we do. Because we investigate the barn. There's no difference between this barn and that barn. They're both the same. The person without capacity looking after this cow now. You're right. He shouldn't.